Welcome to another Fresh Fiction Video Book Club. I'm Samantha T, and today's guest author is Jessica Joyce, here to talk about her latest book, The EX VOWS, a book about a second chance romance and a bit of a disaster wedding that they need to
Yes.
cope with. Welcome, Jessica. It's so good to see you.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
And you're fresh back from Steamy Lit out in California, right?
I am. Yes, I am. It was amazing.
After
Thank you.
big cons like that, do you come back thoroughly recharged and ready to go, or do you need more recovery time to get back into the swing of things?
I have a child, so I have to run right back into real life. But it's funny because obviously it's exhausting, but in the best way possible. So I really do always come back recharged. Like I just love chatting with people and talking to them about books, my books, other people's books. I love the romance community. It's especially in situations like that. I feel like everybody's so joyful and ready to talk about all of the things that we love the most. So I think I err on the side of recharged, I think.
I always love events like that because I come out of there with a mile long new TBR list, always finding
Totally.
new authors and new books. And it's okay, what else am I going to start with? Right.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, same.
So it's the nice aspect, right? Jessica, for some of our readers who might be new to you, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you first get started writing?
So I have two books out now, two and a half technically, I like to say, because I did a little holiday novelette late last year as well. But my debut, You with a View, came out last July, and then The EX VOWS came out this July. And I live in the Bay Area in California and love it. I love setting my books here, at least partly. And I've always been a writer. I started writing when I was young. When I was a kid, I was just like writing random stories. And that sort of continued as I went into adolescence and then as a grown up and stuff. I just wrote for myself just because I loved telling stories. I was a voracious reader when I was little. And then that turned into wanting to tell stories. And I really didn't share my writing until I went through a period of time where I wrote fan fiction. And that was the first time that I ever shared my writing with anybody. And I caught the bug a little bit because it was so much fun to share my stories with people and to get comments and feedback and again just be in the community. And yeah, I just loved it so much. And I was writing fan fiction. It was Twilight fan fiction, in case anyone's wondering. I wrote that sort of like from 2009 to 2011, and then took a bit of a break in terms of sharing my work, but I was still writing. And then, oh, I'm so sorry. And then in 2020, I decided I wanted to try and get published, and that ended up happening in 2021. And I've been doing that ever since. So it's been really cool. But writing has always been part of my life. So yes, and yes, 50 Shades was a Twilight fan fiction. That's true.
But I think that's also so interesting because there's so many authors who have said that they really got their start in sharing their
Hmm.
writing, like you, with others
Hmm.
from doing fan fiction. But what do you think was the biggest shift for you in doing the fan fiction to then get it to a different, or is it a different style of writing for when you're targeting a longer script in a or a published work?
I think that it's different in that obviously fan fiction is derivative of something that already exists. And so you're borrowing from original source material versus writing your own work, which is completely from scratch. It's like you're building a world, and even in contemporary romance, where your characters are living in a world that already exists, you do still have to world build, right? Because you have to describe the world that they're living in, the sort of setting that they're living in, and so it's a lot more work. It takes longer, and with fan fiction it was this cadence of I would write a chapter, I would put it up online, I would get feedback, I would write another chapter, I would put it up online, I'd get feedback. So there was like a real immediacy to it. where I would get feedback right away versus traditional publishing or just publishing an entire book at one time, where the process, especially in traditional, takes a lot longer. From the time that I signed my deal with my publisher to when You with a View got published, it was 18 months. And so there was a really long lag time of this book was written, but nobody had seen it, nobody had read it. And so there's just it's a much longer lead time. There's a lot more time for like the anxieties to kick in, like, is anyone going to this book? I don't know. And then the feedback is obviously different because people are writing reviews of the whole thing. And so in that way it's different. I think where I see a lot of similarities is in the community. Again, the romance community is so welcoming and robust, just like the fanfic community was. And I think romance in particular is such like an enthusiastic and passionate group of people. And that really, in my opinion, mirrors the experience of writing fan fiction, because that was the same. Everybody just loved reading about these characters. And there are definitely differences and there are similarities. And I think the payoff for me is the same. It just happens in different ways.
And with your books, actually with both books, the X Vows and also You with the View, the characters find themselves in such, I'll say, unusual circumstances, because I don't want to give away spoilers, but there's things
Yeah.
that go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But with the story, it's very much character driven, in that
Yeah.
the characters seem very realistic and relatable as they're going through things. And what is your process in trying to build out your characters where it is these different characteristics where, oh, hey, this is what's really going to build that relationship and get them through to these different plot points?
Yeah. I always really start with the main character and what she's like, what her emotional wound is. For Noelle, it was her grandma passing away and her dealing with grief and feeling lost in her life. And with Georgia and the X Vows, it's much more of, being a people pleaser, being afraid to show people who she is in totality and show the messier parts of herself. And so I really often think of who the person is first, and I build around that. What situations does she need to be put in order to challenge her misbelief about herself, or her misbelief about somebody else, or her misbelief about the world, or all three? And I build out characters, like secondary characters, the love interest. I build all of that sort of around that core belief or emotional wound that she might have. And sometimes parts of the plot come first. With You with a View, I knew that I wanted to write a story about a woman who was dealing with the loss of her grandmother, and some of the other elements came secondarily to that, like her sort of struggling with feeling like she had peaked in high school and trying to find her footing, trying to figure out what success meant to her. But typically I really do start with what the character is. I love digging into character arcs. I love sort of playing around with a character who is a little bit either lost or broken or um, lonely at the beginning of the story, and really take her through to the end and leave her in a place where she's better off than she was at the beginning, and better off holistically as a person, not just because she's in love, but because she has had realizations about herself and her life as well. So that typically comes first. I would honestly, if I could, I would write just like a totally character driven book with no external plot, but I know that's not as fun for everybody as it is for me. So I really try to shove the plot in there. But yeah, I really love diving into character and getting to know my characters on a very granular level, to the point where there are things I know about them that never make it into the book. But if you're like, what's their favorite, whatever, I'd be like, she's like this and he's like that. And I have all of this information socked away in my brain.
So, what is your writing process like then? So, I mean, with all of that, are you writing it from start to finish? Are you a plotter, or is it one where it's like, oh, here's this little piece, and let me go over here and write this other section, and I'll pull them all
Yeah.
together depending on what the mood is, since it's
Hmm.
character driven.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I know people who are like that, where they're like, I just thought of a scene that's 70% into the book and I just wrote it. And I'm like, how do you do that? Because you don't know what they're going to be feeling or thinking at that point. And I'm a very linear writer to the point where I can make little notes about things. And I usually set aside some time for myself, like a few months, honestly, for myself before I dive into drafting, where I'm literally just daydreaming about them. I'm thinking about who the main character is. I'm thinking about who the love interest is. I'm thinking about plot points. I'm thinking about how they feel. I'm like gathering little pieces of media, like a song that could relate to them, a TikTok or an Instagram reel or whatever, like that feels like them. And so it's a lot of fact finding. And then once I start drafting, I feel like I'm starting in a place where like I already know who they are as people. And of course, there's still so much discovery that happens in the drafting. And I'm not a plotter because I find that if I overplot a story, the magic kind of dies for me. I really do have to discover as I go. I have to surprise myself because that sort of keeps me motivated to keep going. And so usually I'll know the main beats in the story. I know where it starts. I have an idea of where they'll be in the middle, and then I have a general idea of what's going to happen at the end. But a lot of times I still get surprised at the end when once I get to that point, I'm like, oh, I was going to go this way, and actually we're going this way. This is the way it needs to end. And so, yeah, so I feel like I have to write linear because of all the discovery that happens along the way. I wouldn't know how to write a scene that happens at 70% because I'm not there yet. That's just how my brain works. Yeah, I used to agonize over the fact that I wasn't a plotter because so many people I knew, they'd be like, I have a 12-page outline. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing it wrong. But it's just the way that my brain works. And now I've done this enough times that I'm like, okay, this is my process. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. We're going to just go with it. It's a little chaotic in the drafting process. But then by the time I'd finished the draft, I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm 90% there.
Well, what was the biggest surprise for you in writing this book then?
Gosh, oh my gosh. Honestly, a lot because I rewrote the first 30% maybe three times because every time I wrote, I'll say like the first 10 chapters, so maybe not the first 30%, but the first 10 chapters, I definitely rewrote. And it was just like, I don't know how to explain it, but like the vibes were off. And I knew the vibes were off, but I didn't know how to explain it to myself. So I kept like trying to come at it from a different angle. And I think Georgia ended up being a little more resistant to giving in to her feelings for Eli than I had initially planned, just because I needed that tension to be there. I needed the conflict to be there. And if as I was writing it, where she was like giving in earlier, I was like, it doesn't hold up in terms of keeping the tension high, which of course
Right.
is what keeps the reader hooked. And so it was interesting to be in the middle of drafting it and be like, okay, I was wrong about this. She really needs to be like, we're only together for this week. That's it. And afterwards we're going back to being friends. And once I decided that I needed to lean into it, the rest of the chapters really came a lot easier for me because usually the way that I know that I'm going in the wrong direction is that I always visualize my brain as like a very stubborn dog. And if I'm like walking a dog and the dog doesn't want to go to the right, he wants to go to the left, I'm not going to get him to go to the right. And so I always imagine my brain that way. If I'm like, we're going to go to the right, and my brain's, we're not going to the right, we're going to the left. Eventually I have to give in and be like, okay, we're going to the left. And that happened a lot while I was drafting, where I was like, we're going to do this. And instead it was like, nope, we're going this way. So I think that was one of the bigger things where I really had to adjust her level of resistance. And the epilogue, I had no idea. I actually wrote a very different version of the epilogue when I turned it into my editor. And when I emailed her my draft, I was like, the epilogue is wrong. I can't tell you why it's wrong, but it's wrong, which is like it's a running thing with me. I'm always like, I can't explain to you why it's not right, but it's not right. And thankfully, after she read it, she came back to me and was like, okay, why don't we try? She like gave me a sort of a laundry list of ideas, and I had a spark of an idea from her list, and it ended up being exactly what I wanted it to be. But it's just so interesting to know, and then all of a sudden it all just comes together and coalesces. It's a very interesting process.
I'm curious, what do you do with those other drafts then, like the epilogue? Okay, granted, it didn't, the first one you wrote didn't work. Do you save those versions in a file, or do you completely get rid of them as just wipe them from the face of existence? What do you do with those? Are there still good nuggets that you might want to keep and refer to later?
Yeah, I keep everything. It's funny because I draft in Google Docs, and so I go by, I like every book I write has a folder, and usually there are multiple folders within the folder where it's like draft one, old, draft one, new, draft two, old, or like draft two, August 21st or whatever. So I usually end up having 6 different documents of versions of the draft. I never get rid of anything because sometimes I'll go back and use even just like a sentence. I'm like, oh, I remember a sentence I wrote that was like really pretty. I want to go back and pluck it from this other draft. And so I'll do that. And I really also like to, because I hate drafting, it's like the most unpleasant part of the process for me. And so I really like going back when I'm writing another book. I like going back to those folders and reminding myself that I went through this feeling before, and I wrote a chapter wrong, but eventually I wrote the chapter right. And it reminds me that this is just part of my process, is discovering all of those things about the story. So I really do, I like, it's like a little time capsule a little bit for me to go back and look at it. And I love being able to go back and be like, okay, this is what I was doing then, or this is what I was doing on draft 4 or whatever. And I like the process of looking at it.
Jessica, I want to switch over to what we call our fresh fiction facts. These are a series of rapid fire questions off the top of your head. Okay?
Okay. Yes, I'm ready.
Start off with an easy one.
Okay.
Who would you most want to be who would you most want to be stuck in an elevator with?
I feel like Eli because, well, first of all, I hate small spaces, so I would be absolutely panicking. So I think Eli because he would keep me calm. Not Adam. Adam would be freaking out with me.
Other than books, what is something that you own a ridiculous amount of?
Shoes.
What luxury item can you not live without?
Luxury item. Oh my gosh. I love my skincare. Like I have to have like my semi-expensive skincare no matter what is happening in my life. That is the one thing I can't live without.
What is your most dog-eared book or repeated reading? The one you keep going back to?
I love I love literally every Christina Lauren book known to man, but I love to reread their older stuff. They have 2 series, the Beautiful series and I think it's called The Wild Nights. And those 2 series, the books within them, I reread them regularly and I love them.
You've been kidnapped, but they return you 2 hours later because you will not stop talking about what?
Oh, Pride and Prejudice, the 2005 version.
Okay, so the 2005 is your absolute favorite?
Yep.
Okay. See, that alone can spur a whole set of debates, right?
I know. Yeah. What if they love the
Everyone has
1985 miniseries? Yeah. I love it.
My favorite is actually a musical version. It was Bride and Prejudice, and it's a Bollywood takeoff of it. Completely out there, but it's a fun movie. It's like
I love it. Yeah, that's great. I love
I
that.
like the others too, though. But
Yeah. We all have our sort of comfort favorite, right?
Okay, if you knew it was, we all have our little ones, right?
Yeah.
Okay, if you knew it was real, would you rather encounter a ghost or an alien?
I think ghosts are real and I have encountered them. So I think a ghost because aliens are a very unknown entity and who knows what could happen. So I'll say ghost.
Okay, okay. Um, okay, and especially since you just went to Steamy Lit, and there's
Hmm.
so many people I know who were there. Who is an author that you still fangirl over, or that you would fangirl over if you ran into them?
I would I've met so many authors now that I'm a little desensitized, but Lisa Kleypas, if I ever saw her in real life, I would be speechless, I think. Oh, and I did see Beverly Jenkins at Steamy Lit several times, and I was like beside myself. I couldn't even approach her because she's royalty.
Yep, Miss Bev. Okay,
Yeah.
and I'm going to put you on the spot for Lisa Kleypas. Are you a
Okay.
fan of her contemporaries or her historical?
Historical. I love
Which
her
one do you go with?
historical.
Historical or
Historical. Yep. Yeah. It has to be historical.
okay, we can keep you. That's the right answer.
Great. Oh, I'm so glad I passed.
What is your favorite? Right? Aren't you glad? Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your favorite writing field? What keeps you going?
In the literal sense, Topo Chico, which I actually have right now, and in the sort of spiritual sense, I'd say just chatting with the community. I am probably too online, but I love DMing with people and talking about books, and that sort of keeps me obsessed with romance, with reading, with writing, and all of that.
What terrible movie do you legitimately enjoy?
Such a good question. I don't think it's terrible, but I think a lot of people might think it's terrible. And it's called Stick It. It's a gymnastics movie, which I think is very appropriate for the time because it's
Yeah,
the Olympics. Yeah, but I,
good.
I think it's amazing.
Jeff Bridges in it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I
The
love
only thing
it.
is, so I like all those Olympic type in sports movies, but the kicker in that one is it's set in Texas. Okay. And there's
Mm.
all these Texas Instruments like sponsorship things. I mean, I work for TI, so I see that. But then there's also mountains in the background. And I'm like, there are no mountains in Texas.
Oh,
What are they doing?
you're like, that's not filmed in Texas. I love it.
But otherwise, classic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Reader, what is something that can immediately take you out of a story or a book?
I think it's hard for me to do too much head hopping. I love dual point of view books, but I think once you get four or more people involved, then I'm like, wait, who's talking? What's happening? And that's not to say I don't read multiple point of view or that I haven't enjoyed it, but I think it's just harder for my brain. And I don't know what it is actually, but I do tend to get a little distracted by that. But I don't know. I don't know if there's anything that really takes me out of reading. I can pretty much get down with anything, to be honest with you. I can enjoy almost anything.
If you could time travel, would you rather go back in time to meet your ancestors or go forward in time and meet your descendants?
I think forward in time. I don't know about if I'd want to go backward in time, but I'd be very interested about the future. So I'll say forward.
Okay, now you did bring up your kiddo earlier.
Yes.
So what is the your favorite book to read to them?
He loves the Dogman series, and I find them so utterly charming and lovely and funny. And there's always like one part that feels so true to life. And I always wonder if Dave Pilkey like slides that in there for the parents because there are some parts that I'm like, gosh, that's like really gets me right in the chest. So I love reading those with him. Yeah.
The other question that our readers always want to know, what are you working on next?
I have two more books contracted with Berkeley, so I'm working on my third book now, and then we'll very soon after that be working on my fourth book with them. So I'm writing away on my next romances.
Any hints that you can give us? Are they full of angst and emotional journeys?
Yeah, they will always be full of emotional journeys. I don't know that this next book is going to be quite as angsty as the X Vows. Second Chances, it just lends itself to the angst and the yearning and the pining. There will always be yearning and pining too, but I don't think it'll be quite as angsty as the X Vows. That's like peak angst for me, probably.
That's why those second chance books always just suck us in,
I
right?
know.
Because
Yep.
you're always hopeful, okay, are they're going to be able to overcome these things? They're
Hmm.
angsty, but it's still, yes, this is why I read these.
Totally. Yeah, it's one of my very favorite tropes. So I love the angst. I love just the like, how are they going to make it work again? So yeah, I love it. I love it.
Jessica, what is the best way for our readers and listeners to keep in touch with you, find out what's going on, and just keep track of everything?
I'm on Instagram, Jessica Joyce Writes. I am on Threads. I also have a newsletter, which you can find the link for in my Instagram bio. And I also have a very out of date website that has a contact page. So if you want to email me instead, you can do that. But I'm mostly on Instagram.
Jessica, thanks again for joining us today for Fresh Fiction's Video Book Club. And I want to encourage all of our readers to check out your latest book, X Vows, because the second chance disaster wedding that they have to traverse through, this book had so many ups and downs, and I know they won't be disappointed with it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.